The third ping from the perimeter sensor was not a glitch. I knew it the way you know when a room has gone wrong before you see why. That feeling lives in the back of your neck, not your head. 22 years of service puts it there permanently. I had spent the last 2 years at Lethbridge Colony trying to convince myself it was gone. It was not gone. I was standing at the coffee dispenser in the Colony Commons when the third ping came through on my wrist display. The dispenser made its usual grinding sound, the kind that suggested something inside it had been slowly losing a battle for months, and I set my cup down and looked at the amber blink on the display for a long moment. 1 blink was a weather anomaly, 2 was a calibration error, 3 from 3 different points on the perimeter in under 2 hours was a pattern, not a glitch. I walked to the monitoring station. The room was empty. It was always empty. At 6:00 in the morning, Pieter Hands, our settlement administrator, operated out of this room from 8:00 to 5:00 and then went home and slept the way young people sleep, which is to say, completely without calculation, without listening for things that should not be there. He was 34 years old and had never been in a situation where sleeping was a risk assessment. I did not hold it against him much. I pulled up the sensor log on the main panel. The first 2 pings had come from the northern perimeter, 90 minutes apart. The pattern of a calibration drift, the kind of thing Pieter would write off without looking twice. The third came from the eastern perimeter, 40 minutes after the second, different sector, different direction, a different source entirely, not a calibration drift. I sat with that for a moment. Lethbridge Colony had not been built to require defending. That was, in fact, the entire point of it. The Galactic Settlement Charter, Article 9, officially designated it a protected non-combat site. We had a charter beacon at the outer marker, a framed document in the colony main hall that declared in 6 languages and 3 alien scripts that this was a place for people who were done, who had earned done, who had come to a small, quiet world 34 light years from Earth to grow things and argue about coffee dispensers and lose at chess. I had been done. 2,312 residents, average age 71. The colony had 3 community gardens, 1 very vocal chess club, more unsolicited opinions about the coffee situation than a reasonable person could count, and combined military service records that, if you lay them end to end, would span more conflicts than most active installations in this sector had ever heard of. Not that it was supposed to matter here. I found Dora Szymanski in the radio room. At 6:30, she was already awake, headphones around her neck, eating a piece of toast that had clearly stopped trying. Dora was 68 years old, former electronic warfare officer with the United Earth Navy. She had retired 3 years ago and moved to Lethbridge because, she said, it was quiet. She ran the colony's amateur radio club with the same operational discipline she had once used to coordinate signal disruptions across a 12-planet engagement zone. The radio club had 11 members and mostly tracked deep space weather. It was the most quietly dangerous hobby in Lethbridge, and no one knew that except me and Dora. I showed her the sensor log without saying anything. She chewed her toast, read the display, chewed some more. Eastern perimeter, she said. Yes, that is the approach vector from the outer belt. Yes. She put the toast down. How long do we have? If they are already inside the outer belt, around 6 hours, if they held at the boundary to observe, maybe 12. I looked at the window. If I am wrong about all of this, Gerald Cutler will never let me hear the end of it. Dora almost smiled. Gerald plants tomatoes in high alkaline soil and considers any output a personal victory. I would not weight his judgment heavily. Gerald Cutler was 3 units down from me, 70 years old, retired logistics coordinator and the most persistent gardener in a colony not designed for gardening. He had attempted tomatoes, peppers too, varieties of melon, and a squash hybrid of his own creation that smelled aggressively of the maintenance bay. He offered his produce to neighbors with the determined optimism of a man who needed something to be working. I left Dora running diagnostics on the colony's communication array and walked back out into the main settlement paths. The colony was waking up. Norm Abbott was on the east path doing his morning walk, slow and deliberate, a 73-year-old man keeping himself in motion through sheer commitment. Pete Calloway was opening the greenhouse at the south end. Carol Dutton was on the comm panel, the medical bay, with the expression she wore for conversations she was winning. Normal, all of it perfectly normal. The perimeter sensor pinged again, then twice more in quick succession. I stood still on the main path. Pressure moved through the colony, the kind that comes before weather, before things that are about to change. People glanced at their wrist displays, heads came up, eyes moved to the sky. Not everyone, not all at the same moment, but enough. Some training does not leave a person. When people began looking up in that particular way, not with curiosity, not with the casual interest of someone checking for clouds, but with the flat, calibrated attention of people who have been in the position of watching a threat approach, I understood clearly that I was not the only one who had recognized the pattern. Walt Briggs came around the corner of the recreation hall with 2 cups of the colony's coffee, which was gray and lukewarm and technically qualified as coffee only by the broadest possible definition. He handed one to me without being asked. He was 76 years old, former Marine, currently in his 2nd year of losing chess to everyone he played with. Complete dignity and zero adjustment to his approach. His hands did not shake. They never had. We stood together and looked at the sky. Well, Walt said. Yes, I said. We drank the coffee. Then Dora's voice came through on the open channel, calm and exact the way she always spoke. I have them on the array, single vessel, unknown registry, holding at outer approach altitude above the eastern horizon. They are running a passive scan. Walt looked into his cup. Have they done this before? 31 times on record, Dora said, as though she had been compiling this information since before I arrived at the radio room. They are called the Vethka. They identify settlements with minimal organized resistance, transmit a formal demand, and occupy when there is no coordinated response. Agricultural colonies, research posts, civilian outposts. They do not historically encounter anything that forces them to reconsider. A moment of silence on the channel. Not once in 31 engagements. Walt set his cup down on the path railing. He looked at me with the expression that was not about chess. Well, he said again. Go find everyone, I said. Not Pieter's emergency council, not the charter committee, the other everyone. The ones for whom the word perimeter still meant something with weight to it. Walt walked away toward the residential blocks unhurried. That was always the thing about Walt. The urgency was all on the inside. I stayed on the path and watched the eastern sky. Up there past the thin upper atmosphere of this quiet world, something was looking down at us and calculating. It was seeing a chartered non-combat site. It was seeing 2,000 elderly residents. It was seeing a colony with no military designation, no weapons manifest, and no defensive infrastructure in the settlement registry. It was not seeing what was actually here. That distinction was going to matter. I finished the coffee, then I walked to the monitoring station and pulled every service record in the colony's personnel database. 847 veterans across 11 branches, 4 separate interstellar conflict engagements, and combined active duty years that totaled more than 19,000. I looked at that number for a long time. Then I started making a list. The Vethkai announced themselves at 9:47 in the morning. Their vessel broke through the upper cloud layer at slow approach speed, which was their version of polite. It was a ship built for suppression, not combat. Long flat hull, dull gray exterior with no visible armament ports. The kind of vessel that did not need to look threatening because the threat was already assumed. They had done this 31 times and nothing had ever made them hesitate. The colony alarm went through every building and dwelling at the same moment, not a siren, a tone, 3 pulses, the universal signal for unidentified approach. Pieter hands reached the monitoring station at a run, still pulling his jacket on, and stopped when he saw me, already seated at the main panel. Sergeant Major Voss, he said, breathing hard. Pieter, I said. He looked at the screen, looked at the vessel on the tracking display, now holding position at 800 m above the eastern field. The charter beacon is active. They know what this settlement is. They know what the registry says it is. He was quiet for a moment. Have you contacted the sector administration? Dora is on it. Earliest response vessel is 6 hours out, maybe longer. I looked at him. He was a decent young man. He had chosen this posting because he believed in the charter, in the idea of a protected place. Pieter, I need you to trust me for the next 6 hours. He opened his mouth. The colony's comm system activated on its own. Dora had patched the incoming transmission to every speaker in the settlement simultaneously, which was either a deliberate decision or a reflex from 20 years of signals work, probably both. The voice that came through was run through a translation algorithm, flat, precise, accented in a way that sat slightly wrong against the syllables. Lethbridge Settlement Registration 774 Galactic Charter Designation. Non-combat, you are addressed by the Vethkai Expansion Authority. This settlement and its assets are subject to transfer under territorial acquisition. Protocol 17. All residents are designated non-combatant elder units. Transfer will commence in 4 hours. Prepare documentation of all colony assets. Non-cooperation will extend the process. This message repeats. The message repeated. I turned the volume down. Pieter sat very still in the chair beside me. Non-combatant elder units, he said. Quietly. Yes. They just described every person in this colony as. Yes. He looked out the window. The Vethkai vessel had not moved. It was simply present the way a problem is present before it becomes a crisis, hanging there at 800 m with all the calm of something that has never once been wrong about an outcome. Down in the rec hall, 83 people were already seated when I arrived. They were not panicking. That was the first thing I noticed. There was no elevated noise, no overlapping voices, no one asking, "What do we do?" They were sitting and waiting. Some of them had brought coffee. Norm Abbott had brought a notepad, which was the most Norm Abbott thing I had ever seen, and he was already writing in it. Walt was at the front. I walked to the front of the room. "You all heard the transmission," I said. "I'm not going to repeat it or explain it. You understood it. You know what 4 hours means, and you know what happens to a site that does not organize before the first landing." Nobody argued. Nobody needed it clarified. "This is what we have," I said. "Colony's maintenance depot has equipment capable of being repurposed. Agricultural infrastructure gives us terrain control in the eastern and southern fields. We have no standing armament because we are a non-combat chartered site, which they are depending on heavily." I paused. "What they have not included in their assessment is that we have 847 veterans in this settlement, distributed across infantry, engineering, naval, electronic warfare, logistics field, medicine, and several other specializations I will get to individually." The room was quiet. "We have 4 hours before their first landing party arrives. I am asking for volunteers to organize into 3 working groups. I am not ordering anyone. This is not a military structure, but I am telling you clearly that the alternative is waiting for sector administration to arrive, and sector administration will arrive after the Vethkai have already moved through this colony." Every single person in the room raised a hand. Not fast, not dramatically, just up of them. I looked at the room for a moment. "Well, all right then," I said. "We worked." Dora took 2 people from the radio club and a former signals officer named Len Hatch, who was 69, walked with a limp and had a memory for radio frequency architecture that was genuinely startling. Together, they moved into the communications room and began the careful, systematic work of mapping the Vethkai vessel's full electromagnetic signature. The maintenance depot became something unrecognizable inside an hour. Former combat engineers, logisticians, and 2 people who simply knew how things came apart and went back together transformed a room full of colony equipment into something with considerably more purpose. Frank Asai, 71 years old, former Army engineer, 3 separate conflict deployments, currently the colony's groundskeeping contractor, took one look at the depot inventory and started giving instructions in a voice that expected to be followed. Nobody was dramatically excited. Nobody was making speeches. People were working the way they work when they know what work is, and they have no energy to waste on performance. Yolanda Ferris, whom everyone called Doc Ferris and who had spent 2 years insisting she was retired, walked into The rec hall at 11:00 in the morning. Looked at what was happening and walked back out without a word. 20 minutes later, she came back with her full medical kit and a look that said she was extremely unhappy about being needed and was going to help anyway. She taped her hands before she started setting up. Old habit, nobody mentioned it. They transmitted their demand again at noon, same words, same flat translated. Precision, transfer will commence in 4 hours, non-cooperation will extend the process. It had now been 2 hours since the first transmission. I was in the monitoring station with Pieter, who was on the colony's official comm trying to reach the sector administrative council. He was doing everything the right way, the charter way, the designated way, and I respected him for it. I also knew that the sector administrative council was going to respond in writing and that the writing was going to arrive several hours after anything useful could be done with it. Pieter, I said, whatever they tell you, keep them on the line. We need the response time on record. It matters. After this is over. He nodded. He was pale but focused. There was more spine in him than I had given credit for, which is what happens when a person is 34 years old and the situation stops being abstract. At 12:40, Dora's voice came through on the channel I had asked her to keep open. I have their communication architecture fully mapped, full uplink array. Standard configuration for this class of vessel. There is a navigational handshake protocol running between the ship and their command relay outside the outer belt. If that handshake is interrupted, the vessel cannot receive new orders or transmit distress signals to the relay. I waited. I can interrupt it, she said, when you are ready. Not yet, I said. Let them land the first party. Let them think we are following protocol. A pause. You want them on the ground. I want them committed, I said. Once the first party is on the ground and away from the shuttle, they cannot fall back to the vessel without authorization. Codes. Another pause, shorter this time. Understood, Dora said. The Vethkai's first landing shuttle descended at 2:15. It touched down in the Eastern Agricultural Field, exactly where their scan would have identified the most open and accessible ground. It was a small shuttle designed for initial survey and asset documentation. Teams, not a full occupation force. They were not sending soldiers first. They were sending administrators. They had done this 31 times. They expected paperwork. 6 figures stepped out of the shuttle. They were tall, pale gray in coloring, dressed in equipment harnesses designed for documentation work. They moved in the unhurried way of people conducting a routine procedure. Their team leader carried a data recorder and was already examining the colony buildings with the systematic attention of someone taking inventory. I watched them on the monitoring screen. Pieter stood beside me, very still. They think we are waiting to sign something, he said. Yes, I said. What are we actually doing? Giving Frank O's team time to finish the Eastern Field approach. Pieter looked at the screen, looked at the 6 Vethkai figures moving across the agricultural field toward the colony gate. What did Frank O's team do to the Eastern Field? Nothing you want detailed right now, I said. Watch the left row. He watched the left row. He did not ask again. The Vethkai documentation team reached the edge of the first field row and stopped. They stopped not because anything physically blocked their path, but because the ground in front of them had changed in ways their scanner was reading as significant. Frank Oz had worked for 90 minutes in that field with 4 other people. Agricultural equipment can do many things, and in the hands of a combat engineer with a working knowledge of terrain disruption, it can do considerably more things than its user manual describes. The team leader spoke into his comm device, reporting an anomaly, requesting guidance. The guidance was not going to arrive as expected because at that same moment Dora Szymanski entered 3 commands into the colony's communication relay interface, and the Vethkai vessel's navigation handshake dropped. The vessel went quiet. It did not go dark, it did not move, it simply became a vessel that could no longer communicate with anything beyond its own hull. Down in the eastern field, the documentation team's communication devices lit up with error signals. 6 tall figures looked at their equipment, looked at each other, looked at the colony buildings in the distance. I was not watching from the monitoring station anymore. I was on the east path with Walt and Norm Abbott and a former infantry officer named Jeff Mahler, who was 67 years old and had the calm, deliberate movement of someone who had been in genuinely difficult situations and emerged from all of them by being methodical. Jeff was carrying a colony maintenance tool. It was technically a maintenance tool in Jeff's hands. In that moment, it looked like something else entirely. The documentation team began moving back toward their shuttle. That was the right decision on their part. It was also useful information. It told me that the team leader understood quickly that something had changed, and that returning to the shuttle and reestablishing contact with the vessel was the correct response, which meant he had been in situations that required that kind of fast assessment before, which meant the Vethkai did not send entirely inexperienced people on these operations. They sent cautious, practical people who recognized when a situation had shifted. Good, useful to know. Walt was beside me watching the team cross the field. They are going back, he said. Yes. What do we want from this? We want them back on the shuttle. We want the shuttle to return to the vessel, and we want the vessel commander to understand that this is not a standard assignment. Walt considered that. So we are not stopping them. Not yet, I said. We are showing them. The documentation team reached their shuttle in 7 minutes. The shuttle lifted off in under 3. It returned to the vessel without incident. For 45 minutes, nothing happened. In those 45 minutes, the colony finished what it had started. Frank's team completed the eastern field approach work. 2 former naval engineers, both residents in the colony's west residential block, appeared at the maintenance depot on their own initiative and began doing things with the colony's water pressure infrastructure that I chose not to examine closely because I had other tasks. In Frank Oz, I was competent and I trusted the outcome. Carol Dutton, 66 years old, former Army logistics officer and the most organized person in Lethbridge Colony by a margin that was not close, set up a coordination structure in the rec hall. Using the whiteboard, 6 handheld comm units, and a map of the colony that she had drawn from memory in under 10 minutes. I checked the map. It was completely Accurate. Doc Ferris did not look up from her medical station once during those 45 minutes she was preparing. She had been a field surgeon for 23 years, and she knew what preparing meant. Gerald Cutler appeared at the rec hall door at some point during the third hour. Holding a container of tomatoes, he looked at the organized activity inside, looked at Carol's map, looked at the people moving with focused purpose. Between positions, he set the tomatoes down on the nearest table. "What do I do?" he said. "Logistics," Carol said without looking up. "Supply distribution, whatever anyone needs, you find it and you get it to them. You know where everything in this colony is stored." He did. A logistics officer who had spent 2 years cataloging a colony's entire supply inventory knew exactly where everything was. Gerald Cutler picked up a comm unit and got to work, and his tomatoes sat untouched on the table, and nobody mentioned them. The Vethkai vessel's main communication array activated at 3:17. Not the recorded demand message. A direct live transmission. Dora let it through. The voice was different still. Translated, still running through the algorithm, but with a different cadence. This was not a documentation. "Administrator, Lethbridge settlement, you have interfered with authorized Vethkai communications infrastructure. You are advised that this constitutes non-cooperation under Protocol 17. Consequences will be escalated. Response unit is being deployed. Your charter designation does not provide protection against Protocol 17. Enforcement, stand down all interference. Activity, respond immediately." I picked up the comm handset. "This is Lethbridge Colony," I said. "Your documentation team returned to your vessel safely. They are unharmed. We are a chartered non-combat settlement. We are asking you to withdraw and allow the Galactic Sector Authority to mediate this situation." A pause, then, "Your interference with our communications was a hostile act. Your arrival over a chartered civilian settlement was an aggressive act," I said. "We are prepared to discuss this matter through proper channels. We are not prepared to accept an involuntary transfer of this colony's assets or residents." Another pause, longer this time. "You are a settlement of elder units. You have no military designation. Stand down. We have a sector mediation request on file," I said. "Our sector authority will respond. We ask that you hold your current position." I put the handset down. Dora's voice came through the comm unit. A moment later, "They are not holding." "No," I said. "They are not." The second landing wave came at 4:00. Not a documentation team, 3 shuttles, moving in formation descending toward the eastern field and the northern access road simultaneously. These were not administrators with data recorders. They were wearing full equipment harnesses now, carrying tools designed for occupation and enforcement. There were 14 figures across the 3 shuttles. I picked up the colony-wide comm. "This is VAS, 3 shuttles on approach eastern and northern, 14 figures. All teams go to position. Dora, hold the comm blackout. Frank, eastern field is yours. Jeff, northern approach. Carol, give me a count on the northern line." 12 positioned, 2 on the way, Carol said immediately. "Good." Walt was already moving. He did not wait for a specific instruction. He moved the way he always moved, like a man who has already decided on his direction and is simply walking there. Norm Abbott was at the northern access gate with his comm unit and his notepad, writing down the time of every movement, every action, every development since the first sensor ping, in a calm, precise hand, 73 years old, and keeping a record that was going to be very important when the sector authority eventually arrived. The shuttles landed. What happened next in the eastern field, I did not see directly. I was at the northern access road. What I heard was the sound of Frank O's eyes preparation, meeting the Vethkai's first enforcement team, and then a very long silence, and then Frank's voice on the comm unit. Eastern field secured. 2 back on. Shuttle rest standing by. Jeff, I said. Northern road clear, Jeff Mahler said. They have stopped at the tree line. They are in discussion. Let them discuss. 14 had become something less than 14 in under 4 minutes. In the vessel above, the Vethk commander was receiving a report that did not match any outcome in 31 prior engagements. The Vethkai commander contacted us directly at 5:47. Not a recorded message, not a protocol transmission, an open channel request for direct communication. I answered it. The voice was translated the same way as before, but the cadence had changed. This was precise, controlled, and unhappy in the particular way of someone whose plan has developed complications they did not anticipate. You are the coordinator of this settlement's resistance activity, the commander said. I am Sergeant Major Elias Voss. Retired, I'm a resident of Lethbridge Colony. You are coordinating organized resistance to a lawful acquisition under. I am coordinating the protection of a chartered civilian settlement from an unauthorized occupation, I said. Those are different things. The sector authority has our mediation request on file. We are asking you again to hold your position. A pause. Your people used to reign. Modification to disable 2 members of my enforcement team. Your enforcement team landed on a chartered civilian settlement without authorization, I said. They were not harmed, they were stopped. You are a non-combat site with no military designation. Yes, I said. How are you doing this? I looked at the comm handset for a moment. We have been doing this kind of work since before your fleet was built, I said. We are old. That is not the same thing as finished. The channel went quiet. I have filed an emergency request with the expansion command, the commander said. A full enforcement unit is being deployed to this location. Your resistance will accomplish nothing. Your 32nd will be different from your 31st, I said. That is what I am telling you. I put the handset down. Dora was on the secondary channel. Immediately, they are transmitting on a backup frequency. They found a workaround in the blackout, low bandwidth signal. They cannot receive orders, but they can transmit position data. Can you close it? Not without cutting our own colony. Calm, I need 10 minutes and a specific component from the depot. Get it, take whoever you need. She went. Walt was beside me. He had been beside me for most of the afternoon, moving between positions, checking on people, carrying whatever needed carrying, saying almost nothing. He was the kind of man whose usefulness is hard to describe and impossible to replace. Full enforcement unit, he said. Yes. How long before they arrive? If they are already in the outer belt. 2 hours if they are coming from the relay station 4 to 6. I looked at the sky. The Vethkai vessel was still in position above the eastern field. Unmoving. We have time. We have some time, Walt said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. You know. They are going to come with enough to end this. I know. And you know what that means for the people we have out there. I did know every person in position out there knew it too. They had been in positions like this before, not here. Not on this world, not in this particular situation, but the shape of it was familiar. You hold what you can hold, you protect what you can protect. You give the people counting on you enough time to respond. Dora's signal is going out, I said. The response ping came back under an hour last time we tested that frequency. When the sector response vessel arrives. This ends. Walt nodded. And between now and then. Between now and then, I said, we hold. He picked up his maintenance tool, which in his hands had stopped looking like a maintenance tool some time ago, and walked toward the northern road. I watched him go. The full enforcement unit arrived at 8:13 in the evening. Not 2 hours, not 4, 1 hour and 26 minutes after the commander's transmission. 3 vessels, not the small flat suppression ship still holding above the eastern field. These were military vessels, the kind with visible armament, ports and the hall markings of a standing enforcement unit. They descended in formation and held at 400 m. The colony's alarm had been running for 40 minutes, shifted to the 3-tone military approach signal that everyone above a certain age recognized at a level below conscious thought. Carol was on the colony-wide comm. All positions confirmed. Northern line 8 personnel, eastern approach 14. South gate 6, medical station ready. Pieter Hands was in the monitoring station. He had been there for hours, working his channel to the sector authority, maintaining the record norm. Abbott had started doing the slow and necessary work of the official process. That was going to matter when this was over. At some point in the past 2 hours, he had stopped looking pale and started looking like a man who understood exactly what he was part of. The Vethkai enforcement vessels did not land immediately. They held. That was new. In 31 prior engagements, the enforcement unit landed and moved. Within 12 minutes of arrival, these vessels held for 22 minutes. They were assessing. Every minute they spent assessing was a minute closer to the sector response vessel. Every minute they held was a minute I did not have to ask Walt and Frank and Jeff and Carol and the rest of them to hold ground they were already holding. Through will and experience and the specific uncompromising refusal of people who had already given enough to something and were choosing freely and with full understanding to give a little more. At 8:41, the enforcement vessels began their descent. They did not go to the eastern field. They split. One vessel went north, one went south, one held above the western approach, a containment pattern designed to divide a site's attention across 3 vectors and identify the weakest one. They had done this before. They were good at it. So were we. On the northern road, Walt Briggs took his position at the old signal shelter. At the edge of the tree line, the Snort's highest ground in the northern approach corridor. He had selected that spot himself 3 hours earlier without being told. He knew ground the way people know ground. After a lifetime of being asked to hold it on the southern gate, Pete Calloway and 5 others had spent the afternoon working with the colony's fence infrastructure in ways that significantly changed the approach options available to the Southern enforcement team. In the comm room, Len Hatch sat beside Dora and ran the secondary monitoring array with the focused quiet of a man who had done his best work in small rooms with a lot of equipment and was now at 69 years old doing it again. The Northern enforcement team hit the tree line at 9:00. What happened in the next 11 minutes on the Northern Road is not something I will detail here. I was on the Eastern approach. I know what I heard on the comm channel, which was Frank's voice, then Jeff's voice, then Walt's voice, saying 2 words very calmly. I know the Northern enforcement team returned to their vessel at 9:16. I know the Southern team encountered Pete Calloway's preparations at 9:08 and did not reach the Southern gate. I know the Western approach held for 6 minutes before the colonies combined. Eastern and Western responders reached it. What I did not know until 9:22 was that Walt had not come back from the Northern Road with the rest of the group. Frank told me. I did not say anything for a moment. He told us to fall back, Frank said. He was holding the signal shelter. Is he? He is alive, Frank said. He is down. Len has his position. I breathed. Hold the northern gate, I said. I walked to the northern access road. Walt was in the signal shelter, sitting with his back against the wall. He was hurt in a way I could see immediately, was serious, and in a way that Yolanda Ferris was going to need to assess, and I was not going to name what it looked like because naming it would not help anything right now. His hands were still steady. He looked at me when I came in, and his expression was the same as it always was, settled and quiet. I held it, he said. You held it, I said. I sat down beside him in the signal shelter and we waited for Doc Ferris. Through the shelter's small window, we could see the 3 Vethkai enforcement vessels still holding position above the colony and somewhere above them, the original suppression vessel, and above all of them the cold stars of a sky 34 light years from anywhere that was supposed to matter. At 9:58, Dora's voice came through the comm unit. Sector response vessel, I have them on the array 41 minutes out. I looked at the ceiling of the signal shelter for a long moment. Tell them we are standing by, I said. Doc Ferris arrived at the shelter at 10:03. She looked at Walt. She taped her hands. She began working with the specific focused efficiency of a person for whom this was not a new situation, and for whom that fact had never not once become ordinary. Walt looked at me while she worked. Is it over? He said. Almost, I said. He nodded, closed his eyes. I have seen worse, he said. I did not answer that. The answer was complicated. I had seen worse too. I had also seen this, which was its own kind of thing, and I was not going to sort out the difference in a signal shelter in the dark with Doc Ferris working beside us, and the vessel still holding in the sky. The sector response vessel arrived at 10:39. The Vethkai withdrew before the sector vessel had fully decelerated into orbit. 3 enforcement vessels, the suppression ship, all of them gone. Inside 20 minutes of the sector vessels. Arrival moving out along the eastern trajectory they had come from, back toward whatever relay station had deployed them. No final transmission, no formal conclusion. They simply left the way things leave when they understand. The calculation has changed. The sector vessel's commander, Captain Hilda Pierce, made contact with Pieter's comm station at 11:15. Pieter gave her the complete record. Every transmission, every movement, every action from the first sensor ping to the withdrawal. Norm Abbott's notes. Dora's communication logs, 7 hours of Lethbridge colony documented in full. Captain Pierce was quiet for a long time. When she had finished reviewing it, then she said, "How many casualties?" "One serious," Pieter said. He looked at me. "He is in the medical bay, Doc." Ferris says, "Stable." "How many on their side?" Pieter looked at me again. "None," I said. "They were stopped, not harmed." Captain Pierce was quiet again. Sergeant Major Voss. "Captain, the Vethkai filed a formal complaint with the sector authority, citing organized military resistance at a chartered civilian site." "We are a chartered civilian site," I said. "We responded to an unauthorized occupation attempt. I would recommend they review their own conduct before filing further documents." A pause that might have contained something like amusement, though Captain Pierce was professional enough that it did not show clearly. "I will be sending a security team to the surface," she said. "We will maintain orbital watch until the sector authority ruling is complete." "Appreciated," I said. I walked from the monitoring station to the medical bay. Walt was in the second bed from the door, propped at an angle that Doc Ferris had clearly specified, because she was standing beside the bed watching him with the focused attention she applied to everything she had not finished with. He was awake. He looked at me when I came in. "They are gone," he said. "They are gone." He nodded. His expression did not change. The settlement was quiet and the night was still outside the bay window. And somewhere 3 units down, Gerald Cutler was very likely already standing in his garden assessing what could be saved. "I need a chess opponent," Walt said. "When this is done, you lose every game you play," I said. "Yes," he said, "but I enjoy it." I sat down in the chair beside his bed. The medical bay was full, not with serious injuries, but with the accumulated results of a full day of physical activity by people whose bodies carried the weight of every previous thing they had asked of them. Bruises, strains, the kind of exhaustion that settles into bones that already remember other exhaustions. Doc Ferris moved between the beds with the unhurried efficiency of someone doing the work they are built for, even when they would prefer to be doing something else. Yolanda Ferris had told me at a colony gathering 8 months ago that she had retired from medicine completely, that she was finished with being responsible for other people's survival, that she was going to read and garden carefully so that Gerald's terrible squash hybrid did not contaminate the entire agricultural zone, and sleep through the night. She had not slept through the night in a long time. I suspected people like her did not tend to. She caught me watching her and raised an eyebrow. "Not a word," she said. "Not a word," I agreed. I stayed with Walt until he slept. Then I walked back through the colony. The settlement was quiet in the particular way of a place that has just been through something and is now adjusting to the fact that it is over. People were in the common areas in small groups, talking quietly or sitting alone or doing ordinary things, because sometimes the most useful response to a crisis is to make tea and give your hand something simple to do. Gerald was outside in the dark with a small light, checking his garden rows. Some of the beds had been disrupted during the movement across the eastern path. He was pressing soil back into place with both hands, which was not an efficient way to repair it, and was clearly not about efficiency. I stood at the edge of the path and watched him for a moment. "How bad?" I said. "3 rows," he said. "The tomatoes are done. The peppers might recover." "I am sorry about the tomatoes." He looked at the row in front of him. "They were not very good tomatoes," he said. "The soil is wrong for them. I have known that for 2 years." He pressed another section of soil flat with his palm. "I keep trying anyway." "Yes," I said. "You think that is foolish." "I think that is gardening," I said. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh and returned to his work. I walked to the eastern ridge. The ridge was the highest ground on the colony's eastern side, above the tree line above the field where the Vethka documentation team had landed that morning. From there you could see most of the settlement below, the lit windows, the comm tower with doors array on top, the maintenance depot, the medical bay where Walt was sleeping in the second bed. From the door you could also see the sky, the clean, dark, entirely empty sky that had contained the Vethkai vessels for 7 hours and now contained nothing but stars. I sat on the ridge. Piotr found me there at 2:00 in the morning. He came up the path holding 2 cups of coffee, which told me he had been paying attention to Walt's habit, and he sat down on the rock beside me without asking if I wanted company. We sat in silence for a while. "I have been doing this posting for 6 months, he said. "Before today, the most significant event was the coffee dispenser breaking in January." "The dispenser is still broken," I said. "Yes." He held his cup in both hands. "I read the personnel records during my orientation. I knew the numbers: average age, service records, branch distributions. I had all the information." He paused. "Numbers and understanding are not the same thing." "No," I said. He was quiet for a moment. I did not know, he said, the same words he had said to me earlier, standing on the same ridge in a different dark. He still meant the same thing. He probably always would. I did not answer. There was no answer that would have done anything useful. He was going to carry that understanding now, and that was simply what it was. We drank the terrible coffee and watched the quiet sky. The sector authority ruling came 3 days later. The Vethkai expansion authorities Protocol 17 action was declared invalid. Lethbridge Colony's charter status was affirmed. The Vethkai's formal complaint about organized resistance was addressed in language that was diplomatically careful and clearly communicated that a chartered civilian site containing nearly 1,000 veterans was neither a military installation nor without the means or the will to protect itself, and that the assumption the Vethkai had built 32 operations on had now been formally tested and found to be incorrect. That last part was my addition. I had delivered it to the sector authority liaison in a recorded statement. The Liaison had looked at me with the careful expression of someone choosing their words and then written it down, exactly as I had said it. The journalists arrived on the fourth day. There were 12 of them on the first shuttle, 6 human, 4 from Allied species, 2 working for an interstellar news aggregate I had never heard of. They came with recording equipment and prepared questions and the energy of people who have identified something extraordinary and are trying to figure out how to present it to an audience that was not there to see it. They found an elderly colony going about its business. Dora was in the radio room running her usual deep space weather tracking. She acknowledged the journalists when they appeared in the doorway and then returned to her work. She did not explain anything. She did not offer a summary or a quote. She was tracking weather patterns, and that was what she was doing. Franco, she was overseeing repairs to the Eastern Fields ground infrastructure, the legitimate agricultural infrastructure, not the other kind. He was directing 2 other residents with the same quiet authority. He directed everything. When a journalist asked him what the experience had been like, he said, "There was work that needed doing. We did it," and went back to his directions without further comment. Norm Abbott sat in the Colony Commons with his notepad and answered every question put to him with exact, documented accuracy. He had the complete record, and he gave them the complete record. He did not add drama. He did not minimize. He described in the precise and measured language of a man who had spent a career in official documentation exactly what had happened, in what order, and what the outcome had been. That, I thought, was as complete a record of it as anyone was going to produce. Walt was in a recovery chair in the medical bay, which Doc Ferris had placed near the window because he had asked to be able to see outside, and she had decided that was a reasonable request. He was playing chess on his personal device against an automated opponent. He was losing. He appeared to be entirely fine. One of the journalists found me on the Eastern Ridge in the late afternoon of the 4th day. She was young, human, with a recorder and the kind of patient determination that suggested someone had told her the story she was looking for was up here. She sat down on the same rock Piotr had used. She turned on her recorder. She looked at the colony below and then at me. "Sergeant Major Voss," she said, "Galactic News Consortium is calling this a historic defense. Several outlets are using the word miracle." "That is their word," I said. "You do not use it." "No." She waited. She was good at waiting, which is the most useful quality journalists can have. "What word do you use?" she said. I looked at the settlement below. The Com Tower, the greenhouse Pete Kelly had opened that morning and gone back to tending the medical bay window where Walt was sitting in his recovery chair, losing at chess. Gerald's garden being rebuilt row by row with total commitment to a soil type that was actively working against him. 2,312 people who had come 34 light years to be done and had discovered that being done and being finished were not always the same thing. "No word," I said. "It does not need one." She tried a different approach. They called your colony's residents non-combatant elder units. In the recording of your first direct communication with their commander, you told him that being old is not the same as being finished. That line has been broadcast across 17 systems. People are responding to it. I know, I said. Is that how you see yourself, as not finished? I looked at the sky, clear and empty. Just sky. I came here to be done, I said. That was a real decision made clearly and for reasons I do not regret. I was done with certain things and I still am. I had no desire to return to any of this. I paused. What I found out last week is that there is a difference between not wanting to do a thing and not being able to do it when it is the thing that needs doing. Those are separate. I had confused them. She was writing in a notebook as well as recording, and does that distinction bother you? Yes, I said. She looked up. Course it does, I said. The people in this colony came here for a reason. Every single one of them. They came here because they had spent enough of their lives in positions where other people's survival depended on their decisions, and they needed to stop. That is a real need. It is a legitimate need, and they should have been able to stay here and meet it. I looked at the sky. That they could not. That something decided. The thing they had earned was not actually theirs to keep. That bothers me considerably. She was quiet for a moment. The sector authority has recommended enhanced protective designation for retirement colonies, a strengthened charter status with actual enforcement capability attached. Analysts are saying this colony's defense is directly responsible for that policy development. Good, I said. That is your complete response? Yes. She looked at her notes, looked at the recorder, then she asked the question every journalist had been building toward since the first shuttle landed. Sergeant Major Voss, are you heroes? I looked at the settlement below. Walt losing a chess in the medical bay window and enjoying it. Frank directing repairs in the eastern field with the same voice he used for everything. Dora in the radio room, headphones around her neck, already tracking tomorrow's patterns. Gerald on his knees in the dark beside a garden that would probably give him more difficulty than satisfaction for as long as he kept trying, which was going to be a very long time. Norm with his complete record and his precise hand and his 73-year-old body that walked the east path every single morning because remaining in motion was a decision he had made and continued making. Doc Ferris, who had said clearly that she was finished with being responsible for other people's survival and had then been responsible for other people's survival because she was good at it and it was needed, and she was in the end exactly who she was regardless of what she had decided to call herself. Pie at her hands, 34 years old, sitting on a ridge in the dark with terrible coffee, learning the difference between numbers and understanding. I turned off her recorder, she let me, which told me she already knew where the answer was going. I turned it back on. We were available, I said. She wrote it down. I stood up and walked back down the ridge toward the colony, toward the broken coffee dispenser and Gerald's stubborn garden and the chess club that would meet again on Thursday, toward the radio room where Dora was already running tomorrow's scan, toward the medical bay where Walt would sleep tonight and lose tomorrow and be there the day after that, steady-handed and untroubled and as finished as any of us were ever going to get. It was quiet. That was the point of it. That was always the point of it.